thing that we enjoy doing when midsummer comes to the Oklahoma Gardening Studio is to take you on a tour of all the beds we have in once everything is up and growing, and give you ideas to use in your own home landscape and talk about what works and what doesn't work for us out here. Now right here is a fine example. This is a bed that we have surrounding a Bradford pear and some seasonal shrubbery, and it has a very old-fashioned feel to it, and I think this is the reason. First of all, we have Anthony Waterer spirea, which is a low-growing spirea. It's easy care. The blooms come on new season's wood, so there's no big deal about pruning it and so forth every year. And it has a nice soft look to it in the landscape. Now couple that with some snapdragons, and it starts to look sort of old-timey and kind of a cottage garden feel, and especially with our wattle fence that we wove and installed here this spring. Then over here we have some weeping love grass, and if you step back and look at that, the combination is very old-fashioned, almost Victorian in feel, and so we really think that that's one thing in our landscape that has worked very well for us. Now let's look on over here at our red, white, and blue garden, especially since 4th of July is coming up this week and you have patriotic things on your mind. Here's some ideas that you might try, and in fact there's still time this summer to put in some red, white, and blue features in your garden. Now we've mentioned before our white picket fence to give it a homey feel, but look at how these things are blooming. We have some salvia back here, both blue and the silvery gray, and the combination looks nice and cool for summer. But then to give sort of a firecracker feel, we have these pinwheel petunias that are red and white, and we combine those with some blue and some white petunias, and the combination looks very, very patriotic and red, white, and blue. But if your garden is not entirely in full sun, you might think about having a red, white, and blue garden back in the shade. And right here we have some red and white impatiens, and have that coupled with some lobelia. Now you may have felt in the past that you cannot grow lobelia in Oklahoma, but if you have a shady place, you keep it mulched real well and keep it watered, I think it can last for you pretty well. Here we are the end of June and it's still looking real good. It has a nice cool feel to it. So we think our red, white, and blue garden is pretty much of a success. It's something that you might want to experiment with at your own home. Now over here at our allium garden, we've used blue to our advantage as well to try to cool things down. Our ageratum bed that surrounds it has filled out very well. It survived the spring frosts, and it looks nice and cool compared to all the sandstone that we've used in here. Now when we've talked about the allium garden before, we mentioned that it had a very contemporary feel. Well, now it has kind of a dead feel because alliums don't last all summer. And as they finish blooming, you certainly want to cut them back. And we've done that on some here, and our last one to bloom and give us a show is this drumstick allium right here. It has a nice raspberry color to it, and I think it'll make a good addition to any cut flowers or cut flower designs that we do in our landscape. Some other things that we'll be harvesting soon are our German garlic, some of our Italian garlic, and also some multiplier onions, and that will kind of finish up our year in the allium garden. Then we were going to plan a transition. Now in a garden like this that's getting to look a little bit ugly in midsummer, you have to have a plan if it's going to look good going into fall. And so in the next couple of weeks on our show, you'll see us transform this into a mound of chrysanthemums. And in the past on Oklahoma Gardening, we've had chrysanthemum displays that are multicolor and look just beautiful in the fall. But we have found that if it's just a flat display, you can't really see all the colors at one time. And so we're going to add a couple of berms to this of soil and build it up a little bit, and we think that the fall colors that are in golds and reds and bronzes will look beautiful with the blue ageratum border. I don't know any Oklahoman who wouldn't be proud to have this garden as part of their front landscape, and yet it's a vegetable garden. And I think here we've achieved what we set out to do, is to make vegetable gardening a beautiful thing for your yard. Take a look down here at this ornamental basil. Now this is spicy globe variety, and it just is a ball of green foliage, which is very ornamental. Looks like a little shrub in the landscape, yet it's very tasty also. And our intent with planting this is to have a hedge of green around this garden, not unlike the boxwood hedges that you might have seen in a colonial formal garden. As we step on inside here, Our potatoes are doing real well. We'll be harvesting those in a couple of weeks. And as they come out, with our planned transition, we'll be removing the potatoes, letting the soil rest for a few days, and then we'll be sowing carrots in here for the fall, probably about mid-July, and that'll give us a fall crop and some very ferny foliage in this garden in the fall. Now, in the center island of this bed, we have broccoli and cabbage and alyssum. Of course, the alyssum's not edible, but the broccoli certainly is, and it's ready for harvest. Now, this is one part of our landscape that we've learned from, that the variety selection makes a big difference in an edible landscape. This variety of broccoli is called Italian sprouting, and the dome on it is really not very attractive. I think if we had to do it over again, we'd go with something like Premium Crop or Pac-Man or some others that have a high domed head on them. And if you're reading through seed catalogs or looking at seed packets for your fall broccoli, consider that if you're wanting to use it as part of an edible landscape. Now, Italian sprouting is a prolific variety, but it's not terribly attractive, and it tends to have kind of a convoluted head to it, and this can cause problems in the landscape, especially if you do a lot of overhead watering. They can have little pools in them where water can collect, and that can cause the head to rot. Now, this one's just about ready for harvest. The head is still nice and tight. It's not flowering yet, so we're going to go ahead and cut that one. And later today, we'll be taking the rest of these plants out and sharing these with our volunteers out here and getting this bed ready for a transition into some ornamental peppers for the fall. But take a look over here at something that really has worked for us in this edible landscape, and that is this color combination. We've blended together some purple cabbage, mulched it with cottonseed hulls for give sort of a gray tweed effect, and then surrounded it with the purple alyssum. And I think it has a very attractive look to it, very uniform, yet kind of a soft look in the landscape, and this is certainly something you could try. Right in here we'll have some miniature ornamental peppers to fill in this area for the season. Then on over here, of course, we have some more broccoli, and we want to emphasize, of course, with broccoli that even if yours gets a little ahead of you like this, it's still perfectly edible. What you want to watch for is to not let broccoli get to the stage where the flower petals are showing. By then it's gotten kind of tough and stringy, and you'll have to do some peeling of the stalk and maybe cook the broccoli a little longer for it to be tender. It might really only be suited for soups or stews or whatever, but it still has plenty of nutritional value. Back behind me here, I want to show the contrast of the purple alyssum. We also have some white alyssum that has done just beautifully. And of course, we kind of lucked out because for a while there in June, we've had some cooler weather that's allowed this alyssum to really pop up. And back behind there, we had some ornamental, had some onions that really are not extremely ornamental. They got in a little bit late. They've had some thrips problems. And in talking to a lot of you gardeners around the state, I know you've had a lot of trouble with thrips this year, and we've attributed that to the dry weather early on in the season. But we'll be harvesting those onions, and later this fall, putting in some beans, probably some bush beans, to fill in that space in our edible landscape. Now over here is something that did work for us. This is a combination of ruby red lettuce, and then back here we have green oak leaf lettuce. And of course these have gone by and really have passed their peak, but you could go ahead and harvest the tops of those, but I'd advise you first to taste them. Now let's see how this ruby is doing. It looks good. It's pretty bitter though. I don't think you want to eat that, so probably we'll be pulling that out, putting it in our compost heap. But look at the color contrast with the oak leaf lettuce. That is a great combination, not only a change in color tone, but in texture. Because the ruby lettuce has a ruffled broadleaf, the oak leaf is sort of convoluted and looks like an oak tree. Let's give this a little taste and see if it's going to be any good. That's much better. So we'll go ahead and cut a little bit of that for a salad, and we'll get that watered down and put it in the refrigerator right away, and I think have plenty to harvest in our garden. Now later on this season, once we get this pulled out, we're going to put in some heat-tolerant greens and some greens that will live on into the fall. So in a couple more months, we'll come back to this, give you another update on our edible landscape, and show you how it's turned out. in our children's play garden, the gourds that we planted aren't quite to the top of the teepee, but they're well on their way now. And this is another area where we've learned some lessons that we want to share with you as well. The gourds are doing extremely well, but we have had to tie them onto the bamboo because it's a fairly slick surface, and kind of help these wrap around and help the tendrils attach a little bit better. Now, early in the season, we planted some pole beans, and they were a failure, and it's a good thing that we had the gourds in as a follow-up crop, as a backup, because take a look at this. And a lot of beans around our garden have looked this way this spring. They have 2,4-D damage, and that's one herbicide that really can have some mysterious actions that homeowners may not realize, and the fact that it can drift from as far as a quarter to half mile away because it volatilizes once it is sprayed on the surface of plants. It may be there for a time and then heat it. When the day heats up, it can volatilize off and then move mysteriously, land in one place in the garden and not another. So you may see damage like that in your own yard as well. Well, over here in our candy corn, sweet corn patch that we planted for kids, it looks great. I don't know any child that wouldn't enjoy walking through that or thinking what a mystery it must be. And to help it withstand children and wind, we've taken the time to go in and put in some more bamboo poles that we harvested from our bamboo patch to help it stand up in the wind, because we don't want any kids to be disappointed if they come out here after a windstorm and see our corn laying over. Of course, you couldn't do that in Bixby with several acres of corn, but we do that in a display garden to help us along. Well, these are dinosaur tracks that we made, and also our leaf print stepping stones. Just wanted to show you how those worked out. Remember, we tinted the concrete, we laid different leaves in there, and I think it worked out really well. This is something that, again, is an easy project for you and your kids to do together. And the fun thing was to make these big dinosaur tracks that lead on out to the north edge of our garden. I think those worked out real well for us. Well, on over here is our sunflower house, and Brenda has shown this to you early on when the seeds were just coming up. It has morning glories. They're doing just what they're supposed to do. They're wrapping up around the stems, and when the morning glories and the sunflowers get a little bit taller, we'll string a network of string across the top of this like a lacy canopy, and then the morning glories will be able to grow over that, and that will make the roof of the sunflower house. And as it progresses, we'll show this to you in a few weeks and show you how it turns out. Well, back over here, Steve has been working on Miss Blossom, and that's what we've named this little lady that's in the center of our children's play garden. And Steve, this has really worked out well. I'm impressed because this is something that we just saw in a magazine. It didn't give great detail on how to build her, but Steve, you came up with a really unique idea, and that is to recycle a nursery tree basket. And usually you'll see these around great big trees in the nursery. And tell us about how you built Miss Blossom.
Well, we took this tree basket and we just we turned it upside down, and it looks like a little hoop skirt there. I mean, it was just perfect for her lower body.
Okay.
And we drove a couple of metal T-posts down inside it.
All right.
And we lined it with burlap, and we also made a chicken wire frame for her body right here. And we also did the same thing with her arms, and we put supports inside here and lined them again with burlap, and we filled her up with compost. And I showed this idea to another gardener, and he said, "You'll never keep it wet enough." So what we did, we equipped her with her own circulatory system. And if you look right down here, you can see the end of a soaker hose. And we took this soaker hose and we wrapped it all inside her, and we tied it to her sides, and we even put a Y in it so it would go out into her arms, and so we just keep her wet that way.
That's great, Steve. Well, it looks like it's working real well, and we might want to add that this is a living garden, even though it's vertical, and there are occasional weeds to pull because there is compost in the center. And just before lunch, we even saw a speckled king snake wrapped around her waist, so it sort of looked like a reptile belt or something. It was really something. Well, thanks, Steve. That's really working out well. Well, over here, of course, is our flower clock, and it's filling in well. And true to form, our 4 o'clocks have not opened yet. The time that we're taping this is about 2 in the afternoon, and these aren't going to open for a couple more hours. And so it's really been neat to watch how that's working out as well. Well, our cut flower garden has filled in beautifully. There's all kinds of colors and textures here, and you may be wondering, if you've grown a successful cut flower garden like this one, just how to handle them once they're grown. And Brenda has some great tips to give us. Hi, Brenda.
Hi, Sue.
These straw flowers look gorgeous.
Well, I'm just cutting a few of these and putting them in a bucket of water so I can make an arrangement out of them. And you want to harvest into a bucket of water so that your flowers get into the water as soon as they can.
Okay, so it's not like the magazines where you trudge through with a cute little basket.
Right, that looks romantic, but it doesn't really work.
Okay, so stick with the pickle bucket.
That's right, this works great.
Well, good. Well, it looks like all kinds of things are growing here, and some have gone by, and that's the neat thing about a cut flower garden is that you'll have things that are always in transition. For instance, over here our larkspur has been staked up against the wind. We've enjoyed some nice cuts off of that. It's a little bit past its peak. And then over here our snapdragons are in full bloom, but again going a little bit by the wayside. But then over here Brenda has cut some flowers that I think really are outstanding for a midsummer bouquet. And what tips do you have for people on these, Brenda?
Oh, well, these are great. These are just your regular garden zinnias, some of the taller varieties, and these hot colors look great in the summer. But the interesting thing with this is that we've used some of our Nandina foliage to go ahead and use as the base of this arrangement.
Oh, yeah.
And we use this floral foam here. This is for cut flowers, so that you can soak up the water. This is also made for dry flowers, but you want to make sure and specify to get floral foam for cut flowers.
Okay, it's a little bit finer texture than the foam for dried flowers.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's real easy to stick things in.
Oh, yeah, that is real soft.
We have these nice zinnias here. And then we have some of the blue ageratum that brings out some of the color. And these are the ageratum that we grew in our cut flower garden, and they're a taller variety than what we have over in the allium garden. And finally, with all these hot colors, you want to cool it off a little bit. And so we've used some of our silver salvia in here, and that sets it off really nicely.
Okay, well this looks really great, and it's neat how you can come up with floral designs from just a few simple flowers that most anybody could grow in their garden. It doesn't have to be real elaborate, and you can get just the maximum enjoyment out of it. So come visit our garden through the summer and see how these cuts are coming along and get some ideas for your own floral designs. Thanks, Brenda.
You're welcome.
As we wrap up our theme garden tour here in the Oklahoma Gardening Studio, we wanted to leave with our Oklahoma homestead garden and show you how it's coming along and the things that worked and what didn't work as well. Right here we have some pole beans that we planted quite a few weeks ago, and they're just coming on very, very slowly. And it's interesting, at our extension offices around the state, we're getting a lot of calls from people who say their beans just are not producing quite as well this year. And as is typical in Oklahoma, every year is different depending on the weather, and certainly the homesteaders had those concerns really at the front of their minds because they couldn't just run down to the supermarket if things didn't work out in their gardens. They were really depending on it for food, and so they were thankful for any crop they got. And fortunately, our corn is doing really well. This is Stoll's Evergreen. Again, it's a white sweet corn because before the turn of the century they would not have been eating yellow corn. That was considered animal feed. And then our cabbage has done extremely well, and of course they ate a lot of cabbage because it grew well, it stored real well. And trying to follow in the pioneer spirit, we've tried to intercrop here and take advantage of our space. We have some eggplant here that will follow the cabbage and has grown very well nestled in among it. Just want to harvest this one and see how it's done. Fortunately, our insect problems have been at a minimum. Now we have used modern day cultural practices on this, and we've made sure that we kept it sprayed with Bacillus thuringiensis to keep our bug problems down. But doesn't that look beautiful? And it has a nice firm head to it. I think that's going to work out really well. And keep in mind that in Pioneer's days they did a lot of pickling, made a lot of sauerkraut and things like that that would store well in crocks. Well, over here we have a couple more things that are going in and then others that are coming out. The black-seeded Simpson lettuce that was typically grown around the turn of the century has certainly gone by, and we'll be filling this in with carrots. And typically homesteaders would have planted something that they could harvest through the winter, and carrots going in about July 15th will fit that niche for us really well.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.